Wait, is this going? It is going. Okay. Well, let me start by telling you some bad news. You may know this already. HBU has now decided that face shields are no longer acceptable. So I'm going to have to lecture on all your teachers in a mask. So hopefully I won't pass out from oxygen depletion, but I feel more bad for the people that are watching this. It's bad enough to just watch the face. Now you can't even see the face. So I know, it's crazy. I don't know if you noticed. Did you notice any difference, your other teachers? Or maybe they weren't wearing face shields anyway. But oh, okay. Yeah, but we just found out today, so probably next week you won't be able to anymore. Yeah, we just found out today. I know, it's just crazy, but I guess it's hard for me, but I feel bad because it's like, it just makes it even less personal. You know, you can't see somebody's lips and all that sort of stuff. You can't see their expression. So, what are you going to do? Oh, that's true. I mean, we'll see. I made it through before. I mean, I've got a little asthma, but we'll see. Crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. Well, let us and finish up with, and we are on page 217, and it's number 124. In memoriam, number 124, and it's on page 217. And at the end of the last class, we saw how, remember I said this is such a, I mean, it is an epic. And it's epic, so you can't just have one resolution. You need a series of resolutions because so many issues, personal and societal, are raised in memoriam. And we saw that the actual climax of the poem was when he has that mystical moment where his soul touches Helen. And that's sort of the climax. That resolves his doubt over the immortality of the soul. Then we read the one about ring out the old, ring in the new, and we said that helped resolve his doubts about progress. Now it's like, oh, okay, things are getting better. We can build that post-millennial kingdom we talked about. Then, at the end of the last class, we looked at another resolution poem, and that was resolving, I think it was number 118, resolving his doubts about science, where at first it only looked like a callous nature, and then when he stepped back, he saw, wait a minute, everything seems to be getting better and better. Move upward, working out, and let the ape and tiger die. That we're actually getting better and better and better. So in the same way that whatever we evolved from amoeba to man, we evolved from, so to speak, caveman to the most civilized, the people that will live during the post-millennial kingdom. So it becomes a... Did it just suddenly get cold in here?
It would.
Maybe I'm under that. Just suddenly went cold. Yeah, you never know. You never know. Okay, 124 is now going to resolve his doubts about religion. And you can actually subtitle poem number 124 as Tennyson's testimony. In other words, how I found God. So it begins, that which we dare invoke to bless, our dearest faith, our ghastliest doubt, he, they, one all, within, without, the power and darkness, whom we guess. All right, when you start talking about he, they, one, all, what is he struggling with? What parts of Christianity? Good, the Trinity, right? And you might think also the Incarnation, those two together. Struggling. How did I figure it all out? And then he says, I found him not. He's going to tell us how and where he didn't find God. And then he'll talk about where he did find him. So he says, I found him not in world or sun or eagle's wing or insect's eye. So where did he not find God? Like in science, and today, a lot of apologists, and I would consider myself this, often use what's called intelligent design theory. What is that? Can you say what that means in a nutshell?
What it means is, like, if you found a computer in the wild, you would say it's just naturally occurring because it's too well designed.
Good.
So you wouldn't look at our universe and how much more complex it is than a computer and say it just naturally occurred. There must be a designer.
Good. And so, can you link it to this? So he's not doing. That doesn't mean he's against intelligence design, but that's not where he found it. Because where would some people find evidence of God? You see the example he uses. What is special about an insect's eye? Right, they have that compound eye or something like that, right? It's extremely complex and designed. right? And the same thing with an eagle's wing. We could say anything. But what he's saying is, that's not where I found him. I didn't find him in the evidence of nature, the complexity and design of nature. In fact, I found this once doing some research, that, do any of you remember the first time you looked under a telescope at a drop of water? I'm sorry, not a telescope, maybe a microscope. A drop of water? You've never done that? They don't do that anymore? Oh yes, these little beasties makes you not want to drink water after a while, right? But it's just amazing, right? And this was just starting to happen in the 19th century. And Tennyson looked through and saw the marvels at the microscopic level, and this is what he said. Strange that these wonders should draw some men to God and repel others. No more reason in one than in the other. So he's not, but in one way that means he doesn't find science a sufficient proof of God, but it also means that he doesn't find science a sufficient disproof of God, right? So he's not in that area at all. Okay, another place where he didn't find him. Nor through the questions men may try the petty cobwebs we have spun. He's not finding him in philosophy or even theology. Tennyson was certainly a Christian, but he's probably a little more of a liberal variety if you sat him down. That's not. He's not looking for evidence of God either in nature or in sort of human wisdom and philosophy and things like that. All the famous arguments for the existence of God, right? Aristotle had 5 of them, right? All those things. Did you study those?
I have not studied them yet.
Okay.
Part of it makes me nervous.
Well, we'll still do it. Yeah, well, it's fun. Chocolate doesn't ask silly questions. Wait, what's the rest of it? Ah, chocolate. Okay, is that good? That is your good friend? Milk chocolate or dark chocolate?
White chocolate.
Oh, that's right, white. We're both. See.
Like dark chocolate, I prefer dark chocolate. White chocolate.
Those people don't like it. It's like the Cinderella chocolate.
That's like fake chocolate.
Well, first of all, real white chocolate is fake. It's just sugar. There is no cocoa in it. That's right. Oh, so there is some of cocoa in there. Okay, so. Oh, that's because I always look at the ingredients. I'm like, there's no chocolate in this, but that's what it is. Okay. It is fake chocolate. It's just an excuse.
It's technically part of cocoa queenie.
Okay.
If you have to use the word technically in your description.
You know what it's like when you were a kid? Did you ever have cinnamon toast? Okay, now this is what you do. You take out a piece of toast, you slobber it with butter all over the place, you pour sugar on it, then you sprinkle a little cinnamon, and you call it cinnamon toast. You don't call it butter toast or sugar toast. You call it by the one healthy thing on it, right? Oh, okay, you're a
Be
little
generous with the cinnamon.
Okay, a little more. I put cinnamon on everything. I put cinnamon on my...
Don't cover it. Just like
Oh, okay, I like cinnamon. Or I had a student who she was from India, and she said, I'm going to make some watermelon shakes. I said, oh, what are in your watermelon shakes? That sounds fairly healthy. It was whole milk, vanilla ice cream, sugar, and watermelon, right? And she called it a watermelon shake, the only thing that was somewhat healthy in it. We all do that. I thought it was pretty funny. But it sounds good to me. That sounds good to you? That's it? Yeah, that does sound kind of weird, but I don't know. What's that? Sounds disgusting?
it sounded good until you added the water.
Oh, no, there we go, see? But the chocolate, that's the way to go. I remember once, people talk about chocolate as a sort of aphrodisiac, right? They said chocolate has this thing that may arouse you, but I was watching a special that said, well, chocolate does have that, but sausage has 3 times more. So maybe these big, heavy Germans know something we don't. All right, I don't know. But anyway, never forget that. It does. It's good stuff. I mean, the old Aztecs, that was part of their religious ceremonies. They took
Dark chocolate's good for your heart. So.
Yeah. But not when you add so much milk and sugar and stuff to it like we do. Just the regular. Have you ever tried dark chocolate? It's pretty bitter, though. You got to get a taste for it.
I accidentally tried it.
I mean, I'll eat dark chocolate because I'm lactose intolerant, so some dark chocolate doesn't have any milk. Although sometimes it says dark chocolate, but it still has milk. But the real stuff has no milk. How do we get off on chocolate? Okay.
My shirt.
Okay, okay. I wasn't crazy. I don't know why I was thinking of chocolate. Okay. Where was I? So that's where I didn't find him. If ere when faith had fallen asleep, I heard a voice, believe no more, and heard an ever-breaking shore that tumbled in the godless deep. If that's what I thought, what would I do? By the way, that phrase, believe no more, I think he has in mind Macbeth. One of the scariest moments in Macbeth is basically when Macbeth hears the phrase, sleep no more. You know, the whole second half of the play almost doesn't sleep at all as he's slowly going insane. Sleep no more, right? Macbeth hath murdered sleep. That's what the line is. It's scary?
I really like that line.
You like that line? Right. You haven't got much sleep yourself right now.
You're like, this sounds like just cool. It's the kind of line you want to quote.
And it is pretty cool.
That's a keeper for cinches.
You could say the Honors College had... There we go. You could say the Honors College hath murdered sleep by doing this. That's a good point. Poor Macbeth. Wow. So, if that ever happened, right? If I ever heard an ever-breaking shore that tumbled in the godless deep, I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase existential despair.
Yes.
You heard that before? Okay. You feel it often, right? Oh, there we go. Okay, good. Right? And what does it mean? Existentialism basically says there is no higher meaning, there's no purpose, there just is. The phrase that's often used is existence precedes essence. Most of us believe we're born with essence, with purpose, with meaning, and in fact, for most people, one of our roles in life is to discover what our purpose is and follow it out, right? But if existentialism is true, we merely exist. We're completely blank slates. There's nothing. There's no high. We make up our meaning as we go along. So existential despair is not only you're sad, you feel like there's no hope because there's no direction, there's no meaning, there's no purpose. There's just pain in a world of pain, darkness in a world of darkness. Okay, I've really depressed you right now. You don't want to hear this right now. It's sad, right? Oh, good. There we go. Right? So, if I ever felt that, then he says, a warmth within the breast would melt the freezing reason's colder part, and like a man in wrath, the heart stood up and answered, I have felt. Now, again, this is a much more sort of emotional faith. We often think of Victorian faith, a very emotional faith. And people often sort of make fun of Tennyson here, but you know, Pascal, who was a pretty famous philosopher, and in a sense a theologian, said, the heart hath reasons that reason knows nothing about. You remember that famous phrase? The heart hath reasons. And also another person that says things like that is Kierkegaard. You know, a lot of philosophers are into that. But here, you know, again, I wish he had a little more reason mixed in. But it's finally, and freezing reason is almost hard. It sounds like a little bit like Urizen. I don't know that he has Blake in mind, but I will shatter that with my feeling.
I actually like it because I've been reading, Aristotle, and they're so focused on through reason.
Oh, good, yeah.
Find God, that they kind of ignore the fact that our world, they don't know, that our reason has been corrupted by sin.
Good.
So we can't. We're incapable of finding God through just reason.
Good.
So it's, at least for me, where I've been overbalanced on like
Good.
It's nice to see some acknowledgement of the fact that you can't reason your way to God. You have to have that other more mystical element. Like in 1 Corinthians 13, we have to have love.
Okay, good.
Knowledge,
And do you know what phrase is often used that's linked to Kierkegaard? The leap of faith. You ever heard that, where you kind of come to... In some ways, I would say that C.S. Lewis tries to give us something in between, a step of faith. In other words, it can be explained logically, it's coherent, but it still takes a movement of faith. You can't reason yourself into the kingdom of God. And I think you're right, sometimes people over... And also, whenever you get pure reason, you end up with what... Have you ever heard this phrase, the God of the philosophers? And what that phrase means is you end up with a God that is the first principle, the unmoved mover, but he's ultimately not a personal God. He's not involved. He's the deistic God who sets everything in motion and doesn't do anything. Right, good, the watchmaker God. And so you're right, there needs to be a balance. And remember, he's coming after the Romantics, but he's also coming after the 18th century, which is where deism got very strong. You see it in Alexander Pope and others, where, again, everything's in a system, but God is not sort of intimately involved. So here, he's like, I will stand up and say, I have felt. And then he pulls back and says, no, not like a man in wrath. First it's like a man in wrath, I have felt. And he says, no, that's too strong. No, more like a child in doubt and fear. But that blind clamor made me wise. Then was I as a child that cries, but crying knows his Father near. Remember at the end of, I think it was number 54? So runs my dream, but what am I? An infant crying in the night, an infant crying for the light, and with no language but a cry. Now suddenly, he's still crying, right? He's still in darkness, but now he knows that his Father is near, even if he can't see him.
So like in Job, where at the end, it's not that Job understands
Good.
all the questions that he's been asking the whole book, but he now has confidence that God understands them,
Good.
that he can trust in God to care for him. So that's
Good.
his resolution kind of thing.
And you're right, he has to just trust, I guess. I can't know, I can't see. And that's kind of what he says in the beginning of the prologue.
I was going to say, that relates to what I was thinking just a minute ago. I guess kind of like C.S. Lewis's view that the world, there is a reasonable logical explanation, but because our reason is flawed,
Good.
we can't perfectly understand it, so we have to trust on faith.
Good.
Perhaps a little bit.
No, it does, you're right. We can't... See, the phrase total depravity, used by the Calvinists, is often misunderstood. It doesn't mean utterly depraved. It doesn't mean that we're like our black is God's white is our... It means that every part of us has been subjected to the fall. So in other words, it's not just our body and soul that's fallen, but our reason is fallen. But so is our imagination. So is, every part of us has been touched by the fall. So you can't reason yourself. Although, if you really look at Aquinas carefully, Aquinas always backs up things with authority because he knows our reason is flawed. And that's one of the reasons he does it. It's kind of odd. It takes a while to get used to that. But you're right. Sometimes I think we can get overly optimistic and think we can reason anything. But no, the reason is fallen too. It's also been subjected to that depravity, to that fall. And so here, I cry, but again, it's not strong. I mentioned before that it's a lot like A Grief Observed, a book that C.S. Lewis wrote, where he's struggling. And in some ways, the climax of A Grief Observed, maybe I talked about this before? I can't remember. But anyway, he says, picture a man in total darkness. Because he's in total darkness, he thinks he's underground in a cave or in a prison. And there he sits, despairing. And then suddenly, Lewis says, he hears a distant noise, maybe cattle lowing on the hill, or the wind through the trees, or the distant gurgling of a brook. And suddenly he realizes he's not in a dungeon, but in the open air. Now, in one sense, his situation hasn't changed. He still waits in darkness. But now he knows that the unseen world is greater than he thinks. Right? Suddenly, an expanding moment. So he's still a child crying, but he knows his Father's near. And when that happens, and what I am, beheld again what is, and no man understands. And out of darkness came the hands that reached through nature, molding man. What did we just get again? The hand, that motif has come back. This time, no, it's not hands reaching up, groping, right? It is the hands of God reaching down. And he's sort of giving us a sort of midway between theism and evolution, where God's hands are doing it, but he's molding man sort of through nature, right? That idea, molding. And in the last part, I'll show you there's another example of what he's saying there. So finally, let's turn to the epilogue, which is on page 220, the epilogue of the poem. And it's just wonderful the way that Tennyson arranged this, so that it all takes place over a 3-year period with 3 Christmases, 3 New Years. There's poems about the first anniversary of Hallam's death, the second anniversary, Hallam's birthday, and all sorts of things that come up. But the way he decided to end it is when another one of his sisters, not the one that Hallam was engaged to, but another sister got married. And what a wonderful way to end this with a marriage. Because what other book ends with a marriage? Yeah, the Bible, very good. I mean, comedies do, but the Bible itself ends with the marriage of Christ and the church. So it begins with the Bible begins with the death and ends with the marriage. The death being eating of the apple and maybe Cain and Abel, and ends with the marriage. And so this will follow that. And of course, in a sense, Dante almost ends with images of marriage and stuff when he's reunited with Beatrice and things like that. So it just makes sense that he would set it during that occasion, right? That's the bookends. And then at the very end of the epilogue, which is the end of the poem, if you start at line 123, he has this powerful image suddenly as he's meditating and he's thinking about the marriage and when the marriage will give way to children, right? The hope of new life. And then he says, line 123, a soul shall draw from out the vast and strike his being into bounds and move through life of lower phase, result in man, be born and think and act and love, a closer link betwixt us and the crowning race of those that eye to eye shall look on knowledge, under whose command is earth and earth's, and in their hand is nature like an open book. Wow. Now, he's using an image here. Does anybody know heard of embryology? Okay, the study of the embryo in its different stages, embryology. Right? Have you ever seen the pictures of an embryo as it goes through stages? Right? And they might have taught you that at certain points it looks like a tadpole, or looks like a fish, or looks like a fetal pig, right? And a lot of sort of the evolution period and also the theistic evolutionists tried to say that as we go through in the womb, it's like we go through all the phases of evolution. Do you know what's wrong with that?
Well, I was going to say there was like people before they actually saw the pictures who thought that you literally did that in the womb.
Good,
and they
good.
got the picture and they were like, no, you're wrong.
And well, it's interesting because they're called the Haeckel drawings, a guy named Ernst Haeckel, and they still appear in every evolutionary textbook. But they've actually been disproved for a very long time. It turns out, number one, they were partly forged. He actually changed it to make it look like that, because he was an evolutionist. But also, now that we have much more, better, whatever, telescope, we now realize that if you look at it at the very earliest stage, the embryo is completely unique. There are later stages where it does look a little bit like a fish or a tadpole, but that breaks the whole thing down. If you're totally unique at the beginning, but it's still, because there's almost no real evidence for evolution, macroevolution, it still appears, like, even though again it was shown to be a forgery. But Tennyson didn't know that, and it makes for an interesting analogy that, in other words, every child in the womb goes through the entire phases of evolution. And that's, you said you'd heard that. That's what he's playing. And I mean, if it were true, it's kind of a cool image. It would be very powerful. But one guy wrote a book called The Icons of Evolution, and he called that an icon that we still cling to, even though it's wrong. Just like the ape to man thing, which again is basically made up.
You should be so horrified because science is built on the foundation that you've got to tell the whole truth.
I know, yeah.
About this. I was just watching this in an adaptation of a book last night, and like that's the whole scientific principle.
I know, yeah.
If you're not pursuing the truth, then you can't advance. And
Yeah.
yet,
You know, it's still the stuff they put in museums and on and on and on. Crazy. But we'll give them a pass. Now, if you want something fancy, I'll tell you what this is. You may have heard this before. It is ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. How's that for a mouthful? You'd have to remember that. I'll tell you what that means. Okay, ontogeny is the development of an individual organism, like each one of us. But phylogeny is the development of a whole group, like a tribal or racial group. And to say that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny is that each individual person replays in himself the whole history of the species. Makes sense? And that is what they're saying, in the embryo. Like I said, it really didn't happen, but I mean, it's a powerful concept. And let me also show you how this still is with us today, because you need to understand that evolution doesn't just underlie science; it underlies almost every discipline out there, including something like anthropology. And have you ever heard how they talk about how man in general? Okay, a lot of times they say little kids, like, we're naturally animistic. You know what animistic means? That means you believe all of nature is alive. We said the romantics touch on that. And that somehow each child, that basically early man was like a little savage child. And in the way that man moved from animism to pantheism to polytheism to religion to science, each individual should do that too. Yeah, they do that. And actually, the Bible actually says we all began as monotheists and fell away, right? And there actually is some evidence out there that some of these tribes still have a memory of what's the word I want? monotheism of one God, but they fell into it and are terrified of the spirits and whatnot. But anyway, all of that idea is still very strong in there. But here, it's a way for Tennyson to bring together the two, what we would call theism and evolution together. And it is a very positive image because it suggests that with each person, with each generation, we're coming closer and closer to perfection. Right? Just think about it. If you ever watch old sci-fi, how do they always show the aliens that have evolved past up and are super intelligent? What do they always have?
They're like just a brain.
Good, exactly. You see it right? Big head. This idea we're going to big, and we'll control things with our brain and stuff like that. And it's really funny, but all this sort of stuff, right? And then nobody has any hair anymore. And I know, yeah, I know. And by the way, I'm not really balding. I have the same amount of hair I did when I was your age, but my brain just keeps growing so much that the hair can't keep up. Yeah, that's my answer, and I'm sticking to it. Anyway, what's that? You can tell he'll like that.
Good. And if we're thinking of Star Trek, those aliens who rely solely on reason are always defeated by.
I see. That's true. You're right.
Like human emotional.
You're right, and that's why Spock alone, they can't do it. He's got to have Kirk to give him that impulsive. Yeah. That's right, yeah. See? That is a good point. And that's something that, we need that balance. We are rational and emotional creatures, just like we're physical and spiritual creatures, right? But here, this idea is it's a post-millennial hope. It's the Victorian spirit of progress. Everything's getting better and better. We're moving forward. We're building the brave new world. We're building the utopia. And with each person, we come closer to what Tennyson calls the crowning race. What is that, 128? The crowning race is when we are perfected, when we've evolved to perfection. Right? Yeah, that is what it is, right? And by the way, can you guess what event in particular sort of destroyed this European faith that things were getting better and better and more, more liberal and more, what's the word I want? More generous, more, what killed it? Yeah, it was World War I especially, right? For America, World War II is more what changed us, but World War I, just wiped out so much of Europe, and they suddenly realized maybe science is not, and then the atom bomb and all that stuff, maybe science, and that's why, what's his name, the famous H.G. Wells, some of his early work is utopian, but then he started doing dystopian stuff, where things go bad and whatnot. But here, in the high Victorian age, everything was perfect. We can build a brave new world. Everything's fine. Science can... you've probably seen that in old movies, too, the idea of the future world where everybody's on moving sidewalks and all glass and stuff. And, well, first of all, we're getting to a point where our cars are going to drive themselves, right? What is it? A Tesla, it's called?
I wish I had a car that could drive itself. That
That'd be nice. Yeah, so you can read and relax.
You need to watch more Star Trek. That never turns out well.
It never turns out well. Unless what we're all going to turn into are those little fat people in Wall-E. Yeah, all the fat people in here.
And then again, the computer turns against you. They have to fight the ship.
That's right. Sooner or later, that's right.
Trust those cars.
Coming to get you, man. Wow. So, again, moving. So each, born, think, act, love, a closer link betwixt us and the crowning race of those that, and this is what they'll be like, those that eye to eye shall look on knowledge. They will have understood all of nature. They will have unpacked all the secrets. Right? We have no fear of Frankenstein here. We have no fear of forbidden knowledge. We're going to open it up. Right?
Frankenstein in the beginning of the book.
Yeah, that's right. Then we thought until we realized it's a Pandora's box. Watch out, right? Under whose command is earth and earths, so we will conquer nature, and in their hand is nature like an open book. That's what these are the people who will live in the crowning race. And of course, if you know, at the very moment we think we've conquered nature, nature's actually conquered us, right? But he says, no longer half akin to brute. Why? Because the ape and tiger have died. Right? No longer half akin to brute. We have moved on up. Okay. For all we thought and loved and did and hoped and suffered is but seed of what in them is flower and fruit. What must the seed do? Jesus says in John chapter 12. Except a grain of wheat
Fall to the ground and die. It abides alone.
Good.
But if it dies, it brings forth much fruit.
Good, excellent. It will multiply, right? So all of our pain and suffering is like seed. He might have also had. Does anybody know the famous phrase by Tertullian? The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. You heard that phrase? Blood of the martyrs is seed, right? Of what in them, the ones that are to come, is flower and fruit, whereof, and this is the most beautiful tribute, whereof the man that with me trod this planet, talking about Hallam, was a noble type, appearing ere the times were ripe. So Hallam was a man who was what? You see what he's saying? Who was born too soon. Right? He was meant to be a member of the crowning race, but he was born too soon. The world wasn't ready for it, which I think is a beautiful tribute. Of course, those of us, if you're romantic, you think you were born too late. Right? You should have been born back then. Although, I think that until I think if I was born back then, I probably would have died of an ear infection or something. But anyway, but you can romanticize at least. If you're a romantic, you think you were born too late. If you're a Victorian, you think you were born too early. Right? You should have been, born in Tomorrowland or something. Right? That friend of mine who lives in God, that God which ever lives and loves, one God, one law, one element, and one far-off divine event, to which the whole creation moves. That final sense of all meaning and purpose, it certainly brings to mind the famous last line of Dante, the love that moves the sun and the other stars. Everything is moving. Suddenly, we have a sense how all of this is part of a greater plan moving forward. And it turns out that Hallam was a glimpse or a foreshadowing of the greater man, the crowning race that is to come. So it's a pretty exciting, uplifting end there, right? Filled with hope and promise. Yeah, well, I know. Yeah, that's what I mean. And remember, he's writing this. He wrote this somewhere maybe around 1840 or something. It was published in 1850. So everything seemed like it was going great, and would continue to for quite some time.
In talking about God and God's plan and purpose, even though Tennyson's idea of the purpose was incorrect.
Right.
We reading it today can still be uplifted by that knowledge.
That we're moving towards it, right? He doesn't know what's happening, and by the way, this same belief hit us again around 2000. You were probably born 2001 or something. Yeah, there you go. Okay, but if you look it up, there was a book that came out about 1999 called "The End of History" by Francis Fukuyama. Japanese name, but he wrote in English. You heard that? You heard that? Okay. And basically, I might have said this before, but he said it looked like everything was moving, like in the 1990s, everything was moving towards what they generally call liberal democracy and free market capitalism. That the whole world was uniting, there would be peace and all that sort of stuff, and then boom, 9/11, suddenly there's terrorism, the drug problem exploded, but it looked like everything was moving towards everything wonderful. And then, maybe it's not so perfect out there. But again, there was that same, we can call it literally millennial hope, because it was about to be the end of the second millennium. So quite literally millennial hope, right? People thought the world would end, this sort of stuff. Crazy. Okay, now, again, Tennyson did not publish In Memoriam until 1850, but he was writing other poems that he was publishing. And other poems can be linked in to the death of Hallam. And one of the poems he wrote right after Tennyson died was Ulysses, which you'll find on page 156. And as you'll see, but I think you all understand how that works. When you look at a poem, at the end of the poem, you'll see two numbers, dates, I mean. The one on the left, the one on the right, is the date when it was published. If you look at the end of Ulysses, it was published in 1842. But the date on the left is when it was written. And of course, sometimes we don't know that. But if we know that difference, that's how the Norton and others do that as well. There'll be two dates. One on the left is when it was written, the one on the right is when it was published. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different. Like I said, sometimes we don't know. Well, we generally know when it was published, but we don't always know when it was written. So this poem, Ulysses, again, it starts on 156, was written right after Hallam died. And it shows a way of dealing with the grief. He did write a lot of poems then that were very grieving. This is a poem about pressing forward, pressing onward and onward, seeking, to sail beyond the sunset, as he says. And so this poem, sort of like the ring out the old, ring in the new that we looked at on Thursday, here's another poem, but written earlier, where Tennyson captures that Victorian spirit of progress, of wanting to ever move on. Not stop, don't stay, don't stagnate, you need to move on. So, I'm going to recite this to you now. I've got to wear this stupid mask. Anyway, okay. Well, let me give you a background so you can enjoy this more. You figure this out when you read it. Okay, Ulysses, of course, is the Latin way of saying Odysseus. Right? And this poem is taking place 3 years after he returned to Ithaca. It says 3 sons later in the poem. So he's been on Ithaca for 3 years, and he's kind of bored, right? I mean, he spent the last 20 years either fighting in Troy or traveling the whole world, and it's changed him into another person. It's given him a wanderlust, as we say. And in the poem, he expresses his need to move on. I can't stay here. I can't stagnate, right? Think about it. I mean, this is not just going back home. This is like living in a podunk town, a little island. You see the world, and you've got to go back and live in, what was it, North Carolina? Was it? No, Virginia.
South Carolina.
South Carolina, South Carolina.
My parents were in, like, this little place called Boiling Springs.
Oh, there you go.
Like boiling, it's boiling.
Well, there you go. How do we go back? How do we go back to this little town, right? It would seem like... So, there's three movements in this poem. The first movement, he's explaining to us and himself why he must leave. Then there's a shorter middle section where he is sort of ceremonially passing the baton down to his son Telemachus, because if he's going to leave, who's going to run the place? And so in that, he is ceremonially passing down the baton. And then in the third movement, the final movement of the poem, imagine him at the shore, and he's calling out to his sailors saying, "Come with me on this last journey of discovery." Okay? So this is one of my favorite poems. So I have it memorized. I always make a few mistakes, but if I make mistakes, it's usually because I'm improving the poem, just so you understand. And I can't do it with a mask. We'll see if I pass out. Okay. It little profits that an idle king by this still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I meet and dole unequal laws unto a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. All times have I enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that love me and alone, on shore and when through scudding drifts the rainy Hyades vex the dim sea. For always roaming with a hungry heart, much have I seen and known, cities of men and manners, councils, climates, governments, myself not least, but honor of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers, far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. I am a part of all that I have met, yet all experience is an arch, where through gleams that eternal world, whose margin fades forever and forever as I move. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, not to rust unburnished, not to shine in use, as though to breathe were life, life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains. But every hour that is saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things. And vile it were for some 3 sons to store and hoard myself, and this grey spirit yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bounds of human thought. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the sceptre in the isle, well loved of me, discerning to fulfill his duties, by slow prudence to make mild or rugged people, and by soft degrees subdue them to the useful and the good. Most blameless is he, centered in the sphere of common duties, decent not to fail in offices of tenderness, and pay meet adoration to my household gods, when I am gone. He works his work, I mine. There lies the port. The vessel puffs her sail. There glooms the dark broad sea. My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and fought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine, and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes. The slow moon climbs. The deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, strike the sounding furrows, for my purpose holds the sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be that we will touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Woo! There we go. Almost passed out. Thank you. That is not easy to do with a mascot. Wild. Now, the good stuff. Now, you've all read the Odyssey. Whether you were in the Honors College or took my Great Works class, you've all read the Odyssey. Is this the Odysseus of Homer? There we go.
Also, he's so much more noble and less like cunning and wily.
Okay,
I
right.
would picture Odysseus kind of like bent over.
Oh, I see. Get it right there. Is this true? I mean, can you imagine the Odysseus of Homer giving this speech?
They
It's different.
thought of him that way, but from my perspective, so I don't know, maybe yes, and maybe no. I think more of like bent over wily
Right.
Odysseus, like impostering this man.
Okay. You should think of him disguise himself as a beggar
Like,
when he gets
started
back.
off this
Right.
way, but like towards the end of the story, he's a little more like paranoid and crazy.
Oh. See, I mean, here, this Victorian Ulysses has a wanderlust, wants to visit the seven seas and see the world. Is that what Odysseus wants in the Odyssey? He just wants to get home, okay? This poem is so powerful, it is re-mythologized Odysseus. Now, he got his idea partly because if you've read Dante's Inferno, Ulysses is in hell, and Ulysses tells a story of a final voyage he took through the Pillars of Hercules, through the Rock of Gibraltar, into the Atlantic Ocean, where he was destroyed and sucked right down into the Inferno. Remember that?
Ironic hero.
Okay, good. Yeah, you're right. That's right. He is, because in that, yeah, he's seeking after forbidden knowledge of the world. But it's amazing. He takes Homer's character, who just wants to go home, that's what he wants, and turns him into a Victorian wanderer. And that's how most people, I think, when you hear the name Odysseus, I think typically people imagine a great sailor, a great wanderer, an explorer. Have you ever heard of Sinbad the Sailor? That's from the 1001 Arabian Nights, who wants to see everything. But he's not. Tennyson has turned him into a Victorian wanderer, which is a pretty powerful change in the mythological sense of someone. Okay, now, why does he have to leave Ithaca, according to him at least? He's changed. He has grown, but Ithaca hasn't. Ithaca is a small town, never changes. It's always the same. But he's changed. His horizons have been broadened, I guess we would say. And now, what do the Ithacans seem like to him? Savage, right? When he says savage, he doesn't necessarily mean like cruel and killing people, but how savage? Good. They're primitive, and what are they only interested in? Good food. Creature comforts, a hoard and sleep and feed, that's it. They don't have a lot of times, kids feel that way about their parents. Oh, Mom, you're just going through the motions. You have no desire to grow in life. I can see that look of recognition there. Come on, Mom. Usually you feel it towards the parent of the same sex. If you're a girl, it's like, Mom, come on. If you're the boys, come on, Dad, get a backbone. Will you do something? You get yourself be pushed around and all that. I mean, I think generally speaking, kids often feel that way about their parents. And he's just like, no, I've grown past Ithaca. I need to move on, right? I'm a different person. Travel has made me, I'm a part of all that I have met, and I need to move forward. Now, of course, the only reason he can move forward is because he's got a son there, right? His son will watch over, because if not, you could say that he's doing something rather irresponsible here. And in fact, how many of you have ever seen a movie called Close Encounters of the Third Kind? Anyone's ever seen that great Steven Spielberg movie? Yeah, it's really good. But at the end, if it's Spielberg, it's John Williams. Right? I think everyone, I don't think there's anything that it wasn't by John Williams. Lucas too is usually John Williams. But where was I? At the end of Close Encounters of the Third Guy, the hero goes off on the spaceship and goes into outer space. And I remember listening to, because that's one of the first movies he made. He was 20s or something, not much more than 30. And he said, if I made that movie again, now that Spielberg has a wife and kids and stuff like that, he says, I would have changed the ending. I would have seen it as irresponsible, because he does have a family. Right? He's kind of estranged from his wife, but he still has a wife and kid, and he gets up and goes on the spaceship. And he's like, I wouldn't do that now. When he wrote that, he was unattached, and I just thought it was kind of interesting. But here, now, again, when we think about a sort of traditional American family with Mom as the domestic goddess and Dad out working, there's something very Victorian there. Again, in the old days, until what job did most people have until the Industrial Revolution? Most people were, in one way or another, farmers, right? And when you're a farmer, you live. Dad doesn't go away to work, right? They do different things. Usually Mom has certain duties and Dad has certain duties, and Mom is pickling things, and if she's a homeschool mom, she's still doing that, making preserves, that kind of stuff. There we go. Okay, she wasn't that much. Did you make preserves? No. Okay, there we go. So go back.
We did do gardening.
Oh, have like an herb garden or something. Oh, I know what you mean. Okay, yeah. Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah, I used to have that sourdough bread. You have to keep feeding it, and then you make it. Yeah, it's weird. But of course, anything that pickles or ketchup or anything that has vinegar in it. Vinegar is a living thing. Not the vinegar itself, but there's a bacteria that makes the vinegar. You have to cultivate it, make sure it doesn't die. It's really weird. Whoever invented making cheese, how did they ever come up with that? It's a very,
It's such a
yeah, just let it.
Yeah,
You wouldn't. I know you wouldn't. Yeah, I'm gonna just let it rot. Okay. Oh, now it's good. I mean, it's just really weird. I don't know. Or even wine. Whoever figured out how to make these things, right? Anyway, so again, we start seeing this after the Industrial Revolution, right, where Dad actually has to go away from the home to work. I bet that was pretty traumatic for all families, right? But here, the Victorian is when have you ever heard the phrase "the cult of domesticity," where Mom is not just taking care of home; she's the goddess. Okay, she is creating a home, and I mean, the Victorians would be the first one where Mom. Do any of you have a mother that goes overboard at Christmas with the trees and the decorations and just it's wild?
My mom has 13 trees.
Oh my gosh, that's wild!
One of them is 12 feet tall. We have the two-story house with one of the ceiling, like the ceiling windows.
Yeah, we have that too, but we still have a small tree.
I think we should.
Oh my gosh!
My mom's like, hey, Preston, I got a 12-foot tree. I look around, I'm like, why?
Why? There we go. He takes this stuff seriously.
And I'm like 5'5" on my fifth day. And our tradition is like, I put the tree topper on. I can't get up there. And she's like, we'll just get a taller ladder. And I'm like, I hate ladders.
When you buy a tree that's literally twice as tall as your son, and then you send him up there, go do it.
I'll put the tree topper on.
You need the abominable snowman to do that, right? Bumbles bounce. Anyway. Oh, poor guy. Forget it. I get too much vertigo. I clean out the gutters. That's about as high as I'm going to go before I get vertigo. But so here, this idea that Telemachus is going to take care of the domestic sphere, so he can go on, right? And then here he is, and again, come, my friends, he's calling in them. And you're old, but we've got one last gasp of glory. I'm not going to give in. Don't go gently into the dark night, whatever that Dylan Thomas poem is. You know that, right? Don't go darkly into the night. Don't gently into that good night. It's like fight. You have to rage against the dying of the light. That's the phrase. You have to rage against the dying of the light. You get that feeling here. It's that Victorian spirit of progress. Move on. Keep discovering. But there's almost a mania to this, right? Okay, he says, all experience is an arch where through gleams that untraveled world. So you're looking through and you see the untraveled world. But what happens? Whose margin fades forever and forever as I move. What's wrong with this idea? I see that untraveled world on the other side of the arch, but every time I come a step closer, what happens? Whose margin fades forever and forever as I move. Where is it? Here it is. It's line 20. The margin keeps moving every time you move towards it. Yeah, you'll never get there, okay? That would be like, I don't know if anybody at HBU, some guy's like, I want to be a millionaire before I'm 25. Well, let's say he does it. Will he be happy? No, I got to have $10 million by the time I'm 35. What if he does it? Is he happy? No, I want to be a billion. I mean, you're never, it's like being an actor. I won the Oscar, but I'm not happy because I want to win 2 Oscars in a row. And then you do it. No, I want to be the first to win 3 in a row,
You gotta have a goal to be working towards. As people, I think, as humans, just like we need something that we're supposed to reach. But we set ourselves goals and then we reach them and then they're disappointing because they don't bring us happiness and fulfillment.
And that's why Ulysses here is very noble, but he is a little bit unstable. Now, I've never been able to find a letter to prove this, but what's weird about this poem when Ulysses calls in his mariners, my men who traveled the world, come with me. You know what's problematic about that? They're all dead, okay? So, it's like you said, I've never found like a letter where somebody asked Tennyson, but either he's not worrying about that, or in a sense he's talking to ghosts. He could be sort of crazy. And look at how the poem ends, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Who says, I will not yield, I will not serve? Satan, okay? There's a sort of satanic energy at the end of this poem. I don't care, I'm going to keep moving forward, I'm going to keep moving on and moving on. And again, in my margin, I've got a question, is there a touch of the Byronic hero? Is he seeking after good knowledge or forbidden knowledge? Again, he's mostly positive, but it also might suggest maybe this can become a mania. This ever seeking, this always wanting to break another frontier and things and move forward. And that's why famously John F. Kennedy gave his final frontier speech, or the new frontier. And in Star Trek they used the phrase final frontier, but that's because they were echoing John F. Kennedy. We'll put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and they did, right? 1969. There's still some people who believe that was fake, by the way. But anyway, you're always pressing on, right? And again, the poem gives us the human spirit at its most indomitable. But maybe there's a little problem. Like I said, I think it's a poem that you could write a more negative. After all, it's like, oh, my wife's old now, I'm leaving. So yeah. So yeah, that's right. Poor Penelope's been waiting all this time. That's right. What did she call it? Calypso? 7 years?
7 years out of your story.
But he was kidnapped by Calypso. But seriously, he stayed a whole year for the fun of it.
With Circe. That's true. Circe, he was there a full year. That's true. So, gotta watch out. Gotta watch out. Now, this poem, Ulysses, does anybody know what the genre of this poem is? It's a lyrical poem. But do you know what kind of a poem it is? Have you ever heard this phrase? It's a poem where the speaker is not the poet, but someone that the poet constructs, and we read the poem, and the poet is getting into the mind of a character that's not him. You ever heard the phrase a dramatic monologue? You ever heard that phrase? Write that down. It's a genre that becomes very famous in the 19th century. It's kind of co-invented by Tennyson and Robert Browning, and people are still writing these dramatic monologues. And again, very different than the Romantic Age, where the I is almost surely the poet, right? Where it's personal introspection. But maybe when we get to the Victorian Age and people are trying to maybe move away from the excess of personalism or something, we start getting this new genre. I call it new. It's not completely new. There is something that's very much like a dramatic monologue, and that is a Shakespearean soliloquy. Because when when Hamlet gives a soliloquy, that's not Shakespeare speaking, that's Hamlet speaking. Okay? And students always make that mistake. They want to say Shakespeare believes, but it's like, no, that's actually what Macbeth says when his whole life was falling apart. Shakespeare is not necessarily an existentialist because Macbeth is after everything falls apart.
Yeah, Shakespeare's not necessarily a murderer just because Macbeth.
Good.
You should be really careful with that kind of.
And so it is a dramatic monologue. Now, the word monologue and soliloquy basically mean the same thing. Okay, soliloquy, solus is alone, right? Soul, and loquacious means talkative. So soliloquy means basically one person talking or talking alone, and monologue, you recognize logos, one speaker. So they basically mean the same thing in Latin or Greek. So this is a monologue, but it's a dramatic monologue. It's got the sense of drama. But imagine if I took the to be or not to be speech out of Hamlet, right? And I presented it as a standalone poem. Well, I probably have to go back and put a little more clues in the poem itself to who this is and whatnot, but that's kind of what a dramatic monologue. Imagine a Shakespearean soliloquy taken out of a play so it can stand on its own, but then, again, you have to make adaptations to it so that it can stand alone. But whenever you read a dramatic monologue, you need to be a little bit of a detective, because most dramatic monologues begin, as we say, in medias res, in the middle of things. They jump right in. And we need to figure out. For instance, I told you, how do we know it's been 3 years since he got back to Ithaca? There's no little thing at the beginning giving you, right? It's that phrase, for some 3 sons have stored myself. Line 29. 3 sons means 3 years, right?
This is so confusing to me. I thought 3 sons meant like 3 days.
Oh, that's true. You're right. You're right. It could. That's right. It could be. It would be the context. And here you realize it's got to be 3 years. It can't be 3 days. But you're right. It is. That's right. The sun. Man, that's really bad, right? Now, of course, whenever you watch cowboy and Indian movies, how do the Indians always tell time? You must have seen at least one Western. See? Moons, right? I'm away for many moons, right? I don't know if that's true, but you always hear that in cowboy and Indian movies. But that's just another way. I mean, the Jews had a lunar calendar. What's that? Yeah, it would be many months, in other words, right? It would be moons. So they speak that way.
I heard that for like early church, like religious festivals and stuff, they were still using early. They would start in like the pagan dates. So they tried to match the calendar up to the moon.
Oh, right.
That's why. This was one theory why the number 13 was considered unlucky. Was because when there was the 13th moon of the year,
that is
they
true.
threw off the calendar.
Yeah, that's true. Because if a month is 28 days, there's actually 13 months in the year, right? There's 13 months in the year. But 28-day months, right? 28 times 13 should give you 365. Let's say I'm not going to do that in my head. You can do that in your head. If you can do that in your head, you're a robot, right? So now, why do you write a dramatic monologue? Well, because it's fun, right? And you have to assemble the clues. But not every single time, but mostly in the greatest dramatic monologues, the speaker of the monologue is warped in some way. So when you read a dramatic monologue, you're a little bit like a psychotherapist trying to figure out what makes this guy tick. Now, Ulysses is unique because he's a pretty noble character. But I tried to show you that even here, there's something wrong. There's a little bit of a twist or a perversion here. But a lot of other dramatic monologues, they're much more twisted. This is the most. And what makes Ulysses so different is that even though Ulysses is not Tennyson, in some ways he is. Okay? I mean, that generally, Robert Browning's dramatic monologues, it's Robert Browning. It's not Robert Browning. It's the speaker. It's not him at all. He's creating another voice that he is inhabiting, and he's wanting to explore the way a mind thinks, the way it twists and turns and things like that. And that's the joy of reading dramatic monologues. Right? And again, it just does seem very Victorian in the sense that I'm withdrawing from this excessive personal introspection and trying to analyze another person. Like if you're writing a drama. So dramatic monologue, you're writing a drama. So take care. And since we can't spend forever, I want to keep moving. I gave you 2 poems by Robert Browning. One of them is called My Last Duchess, and it's on page 328. My Last Duchess. And I'll just say a little bit about this, because we just don't have time to go over it. But My Last Duchess is one of the earlier of Browning's dramatic monologues. And on page 328, My Last Duchess. And in the early versions, in the early dramatic monologues of Browning, almost all the characters he creates are just completely sort of evil and irredeemable. Right? But in a moment, we'll look at another one called The Bishop Orders His Tomb. It's a little bit longer. And starting with that poem, as Browning matured as a writer, and he also matured as a Christian. He became a pretty strong Christian, partly because of his wife, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. I used to teach an entire class on Robert Browning. That's how good he is, but I don't have time now for these things. I've written a book about him, but that's one of my unpublished books. Someday I'll get it published. So later on, he starts to, get a wider view, and starting with the Bishop Orders, every one of his characters, even though they're scalawags and rogues and not really good people, they'll start having some modicum of a redemptive quality to them. And we'll see that. But My Last Duchess is, again, if you read it, I don't know if I don't want to spend too much time, but I'll just tell you, you read this poem, and it is a brilliant analysis of a twisted mind. Because what happens in the poem is it is a duke living in the Renaissance, when dukes had, pretty much complete power, whatever they wanted to do. And he is about to get married again. His wife has died. He's about to get married again. And the envoy has come from the other place to negotiate the dowry with his new wife. He's about to marry the daughter of a count. And while the envoy is there, the duke is giving him a tour of his castle. And at one point, he reveals behind a cloak, he moves. Have you ever seen The Secret Garden?
Yes.
Okay, remember he keeps the picture of his mother behind that? You know The Secret Garden? Okay. Like I said, there's yet another movie version, but I haven't seen it yet, the new one. There's another one, just came out. But he moves that curtain and reveals a painting of his last Duchess, my late Duchess, in other words, the one who died. And she's got this wonderful little smile. And he's showing it to it. He's talking about all that, and he's going on and on about his wife, and he is suggesting that his wife was having an affair with the painter who painted it. That's what he's suggesting. And then he builds up to basically admitting that he had his wife put to death. And then he ends. Now here's the amazing thing. If you read the poem carefully, I don't have time to go into it, but if you read the poem carefully, you will see that even though he tries to convince us, and the envoy, that his wife was somehow evil or adulterous, it becomes very clear when you read carefully, his wife was just a simple, kind-hearted woman who smiled at everybody, who treated everybody equally, whether it was the gardener or her husband, who had joy, and he didn't like it because he couldn't contain her simple joy. If you read it really carefully, keep going back and reading it again and again, you'll see clues that what this poem is a Cinderella story gone bad. It becomes clear that this girl he married was clearly a commoner who everybody loved, and he lifted her up and took her away to his castle, but she doesn't know how to behave with aristocrats, right? She's simple, sweet, smiling, laughing, and he wants to control that, and he can't. Right? Some people, I don't know, are you any of you into Lady Diana and Prince Charles? Too long ago, but in some ways, it's a little bit like that. A lot of people say that the royal family didn't like Lady Diana because she was too much of a people person out there, talking, hugging people, and all that sort of, even hugging people that had leprosy and stuff, and they couldn't control it. She wouldn't behave and act like an aristocrat should act. But again, that's what's amazing. And look, have you ever met somebody? Hopefully, it's not your friend, but you'll meet people that are really. They like slandering other people, not just gossip, but they really say bad things about other people. Have you ever had a case where somebody is slandering someone else in front of you, but they're so caught up in their slander that they trip up and you can see through them? Never happened? Sometimes they'll trip up and you'll find out that person really didn't say all the bad things you said they say, right? things you could do. Sometimes, again, somebody that's so completely sort of narcissistic and in there, they say things about somebody, but you realize they're projecting their own angst until then. And that's the brilliance. I mean, Browning, his understanding of human psychology, both in its good form and its warped form, is just amazing. Okay? But I really want us to start looking at my bishop orders. And that's on page 332. That's the one we want to focus on here. And we'll get started, we'll finish this next class, and then move on to Matthew Arnold. But it's on page 332. And again, just like my last Duchess, we have to look for clues to figure out what's going on as we read the poem. And here, the clue is that the bishop is on his deathbed, right? And he's gathering everyone around him to tell them what he wants his tomb to look like. And that means everything. You know, he's a rich bishop. You know, bishop means you have your own cathedral. And a lot of bishops are buried in the cathedral. Have you ever gone to an old cathedral, and in the back of the cathedral you can see statues of people that are really skinny? Well, they're buried. Whenever you when you go to England, you're always walking on dead people. Did you notice that? When you go to old cathedrals, you're always walking on dead people. They're underneath floorboards, the floorboards, but stone. Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. Oh, that's right. That's when you went with the music people. Yeah. Cool stuff. And you can always tell the Americans, because we're not sure if you can walk over their name, right? Is that wrong? And so Americans are scooting around and stuff, and we're never quite sure whether we should do it or not, or Yeah. Yeah, you're just walking on dead people. And that's why, technically they can't tear those places down, because the rules say, if you do that, you've got to rebury the bodies and figure out who they are, forget who's going to be able to do that. But anyway, so here he is, and he is on his deathbed, right? And so when you're on your deathbed, you would think you would be more reflective, more thinking about God, more thinking about your own life and all that sort of stuff. And it begins, vanity saith the preacher, vanity. Right, so this is the beginning of this is the way a bishop should be on his deathbed, as he's thinking. And that's a quote, of course, from Ecclesiastes, right? All is vanity. Then draw around my bed. Is Ansem keeping back? Nephews, sons mine, God, I know not. Well, she men would have to be your mother once. Old Gandalf envied me, so fair she was. Now, that's really tightly done, and we need to be the detective that unpacks this to figure out what's happening. Now, can you guess why he says, nephews, sons mine? Okay, good. If you're any kind of Catholic priest, it means you're supposed to be celibate, so you shouldn't have any children. Okay? But sometimes, especially in the Renaissance and stuff, when you had some bishops that were corrupt or at least very, very worldly, they would have children. Of course, those children would have to be illegitimate, right? Because they're with a woman, it's not married, right? So these are his illegitimate children, and in those places, guess how they would refer to those children sometimes? As their nephews. Okay, that's what you do. Either your niece or your nephew, right? So here, nephews, he's getting close to death, and the facade is starting to come down. Right? Nephews, sons mine. Who is it? These are the ones he's always called nephews, but they're sons. God, I know not well. She men would have to be your mother once. Okay? Now we've heard something about the mother, who obviously was his lover, illicit lover. Old Gandalf envied me, so fair she was. Now this is not Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. Okay? That would be wild, wouldn't it? Okay? This is also not where Tolkien got the name. But anyway, Gandalf, as you read by, it's clear that Gandalf was the previous bishop. Right? And he has supplanted, and there was clearly a rivalry between our bishop, who's not named, between our bishop and this other bishop, Gandalf. And part of the rivalry is going to be that our bishop wants his funerary arrangement, right? Did you go to Rome and see Michelangelo's famous Moses, or you didn't go to Rome? Okay. Yeah, you probably see pictures of his famous Moses. Moses is actually supposed to be part of a huge funerary thing in honor of Pope Julius, but he never finished it. Michelangelo was like that sometimes. Go do other things. Yeah, he got distracted easily. But he's a great artist. He's allowed to. But here, there's obviously a rivalry going on, and the implication is that somehow Gandalf stole away the woman that he loved. In any case, so fair she was tells you that she's dead, long dead. Okay, and right away we just have an opening into this rather corrupt world here of bishops fighting over women and stuff like that. And he comes and he says, "Well, what's done is done, and she is dead beside, dead long ago." So she died a long time ago. She died young, obviously. We don't know how old these kids are, but they certainly seem to be at least 20, if not older. So she's been dead at least that long. And I am bishop since. And as she died, so must we die ourselves, and then she may perceive the world's a dream. Life, how and what is it? As here I lie in this state chamber, dying by degrees, hours and long hours in the dead night, I ask, do I live? Am I dead? Peace, peace seems all. St. Praxed's ever was the church for peace. And so about this tomb of mine I fought with tooth and nail, to save my niche, ye know. Okay, clearly, after she died, he ended up sort of reducing his life to what? What sort of became his life after she died? You follow what he's saying here? And again, we're not only understanding the plot, so to speak, we're getting into the mind. He has sort of pulled in and what has become his world. Is it? Good, it's the church, okay? St. Praxed is the name of the church. And his church has, in a sense, become his world. And that's why he's going to fight for it. Fight for his niche. The niche is literally, literally it means where you're buried in them with, and again, a lot of times, like I said, you see it, a lot of times they're statues, but they have like this skinny, the way they do it. It's kind of cool. Those generally are the bishops that serve there. And that's where they're buried. In a lot of cathedrals like that. And so, that's where he found peace. He lost everything, but he found peace, and his world is reduced to St. Praxed. And that's where he's found peace. In fact, it's become his microcosm, because he speaks, he talks about it, and he says, line 24, and somewhat of the choir, those silent seats, and up into the airy dome where live the angels, and a sunbeam sure to lurk. Now, what does he mean by saying the angels live in the dome? What do you think he has in mind? What do you think? It's called the cupola. Say, good, painting. When you look up, you would see angels, frescoes painted up there. But he acts as if they're real angels, and the cupola or the dome is the heavens. It's become his microcosm or his whole world, and he's moved into it. And we'll pick this up next time. But look again at how, in one sense, he's such a pathetic character and he's corrupt. But you'll see that the one thing he has that redeems him slightly is his love of art, his fine taste in art, which gives him almost a spiritual quality. And we'll talk about that more, but look at that as you read this again and see, are there elements of the bishop that rise him above just a simple evil scoundrel? He's still a bad guy, but what humanizes him? And then we'll go on and we'll look at two poems by Matthew Arnold, Dover Beach and Stanzas, and we're going to get a little more understanding of what existential despair is and angst, living in a world that's lost its moorings. Good job, folks. We're keeping up. I feel like we're dropping like flies here, though. Everybody, come back to class.